Okay. Hi, John. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So, you've got a book out called Atlas of Wild America, and this is a National Geographic's book. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. It says it features 41 of the most stunning locations in wild America. Have you been to all 41 places?
I have not. I have
Okay.
still a few left to explore as enticements, in fact, to go there.
So, what exactly did you do for the book? Were you the photographer or did you write about the places? Explain what your contribution is.
I am principally a writer, but also taken photographs all of my life. So I visited many of these places, most of them, some of them as long as 55 years ago. Others more recently. In some cases, I over chartered a small plane and overflew them to take photographs to get a better handle on the places that I was writing about. And because I pursued wilderness and wild places all of my life, I have a pretty good concept of what constitutes wilderness and the derivative parts of it all. So I wanted to put together a book that showed not all of, but some of the best places you could go to have a wilderness experience in North America.
Okay, so not all of your books that you've published, as I see it says 15 books that you've published, but not all of them are National Geographic, right?
Yeah, I've done two other National Geographic books before this.
Also says that you were a park ranger at one time and a wilderness guide. So you've pretty
That's
much
correct.
always been an outdoor sort of guy, yeah?
That's correct.
How do you feel about working 40 hours a week in an office?
I couldn't do it anymore. I was an editor for a time and worked 60 to 70 hours a week. And although I learned a lot about the trade and was very helpful and grateful for the job and the people that I work with, my bailiwick is as a freelancer and to travel a great deal and to spend time in the wilderness, as you can imagine. So it took me a couple of years to research and write the book, but it really took me all of my life to research the book.
I see something on here that I've never heard of. Maybe you can explain. The Sonoran pronghorn?
Yeah, that's a formerly endangered species. It's about to be taken off the endangered species list. And that's the other name for it is the antelope. And they know it in the Southwest as the desert ghost. And it became endangered because of roads cutting up its habitat, and they needed to take extreme measures to create areas, a couple of the areas, of course, designated in the book, that gave the pronghorn shelter and refuge.
Teddy Roosevelt was really one of the founding presidents for conservation and land in the United States. And he was also an avid hunter, which some people today think is a contradiction.
Well, I don't think that still today that being a hunter is a contradiction at all in terms of being a conservationist and a wilderness connoisseur. I do think that if you were a big game hunter today, that it's a terrible contradiction because the most big game, as in big game elephants and rhinos, the like that Teddy Roosevelt hunted, are really few and far between. But I think that in many instances, some of the areas that I've written about in this book are open to hunting, and that with proper management and respect, that wildlife populations can be preserved with hunting.
Well, it also keeps the population in check, right? I mean, they can get overpopulated to where it's self-defeating, where they eat all the food that's available and they end up starving to death.
Well, an ecosystem that was totally intact, with its predators intact, wouldn't need this artificial management that we have throughout much of North America. But because we've done away with many of the wolves and the bears, we now have hunting management plans in place that are necessary to keep the wildlife in check, because otherwise, as you say, we would eliminate the elk would eliminate itself, for instance, if there wasn't a hunting season.
I assume you've had some encounters with wildlife. What was the most frightening encounter that you can remember?
Well, I've had more than a few, and it's kind of a toss-up between whether it was the crocodile or the polar bear. But I was in the Everglades sailing a kayak. I had rigged a kayak to sail, and I was sailing very close to shore, kind of weaving in and out of the mangroves along a beach with very shallow water beneath me, and I scared up a crocodile. And I only saw it because it came swimming directly at me in fear, actually, because it wanted to get out to open water, and swam directly beneath my boat and sent a big wall of water over my boat because it was a large crocodile. I couldn't see it because the water was muddy, but that wave of water approaching me was a fearful sight. It all happened too fast to really be scared. It was an adrenaline-provoking moment. But I think that if one travels a great deal in the wilderness, it's inevitable that you're going to run into a crocodile or a polar bear or a grizzly bear or a black bear.
It's interesting about bears because some of them are completely vegetarian, right? And others are exclusively meat eating? Or do they just eat whatever happens to be available in their environment?
That's a great question. Well, technically, bears are omnivores.
Okay.
If we're speaking about grizzly bears, brown bears, one and the same. And they, it depends on their habitat. Now, the coastal bears of Alaska are technically omnivores that will eat anything, but because there are so many salmon, they eat a great deal of salmon, and that's why they become so big. But further north in Alaska, the bears, there aren't as many salmon, or there any salmon at all. So they are, eat 90% vegetarian food, but they are equipped to eat plants that have a lot of protein in them. Or for instance, the bears in Yellowstone at the right time of year will eat hundreds and hundreds of insects, usually moths or butterflies, when they're pupating in logs and rotten logs. So bears are really, they're a lot like us in that they can eat anything. I think their preference would be meat, but meat is really hard for them to hunt and capture and kill. So if you watch a bear in the wilderness, it spends much of its time grazing, much like a cow. And I think that people are surprised that haven't seen grizzlies before to have this opportunity to watch one and see how much of its time it actually spends grazing and eating plants.
Polar bears would be more exclusively meat, simply because there isn't a lot of vegetation up on the ice,
Yeah, the polar bears evolved from the grizzlies. They were cut off. The grizzlies were cut off from, brown bears were cut off from the land by glaciation during the Pleistocene era. And so the brown bear evolved into the sea mammal, the polar bear. And there is not a lot of plant life, and the polar bear evolved to become a marine mammal and swim. Its paws spread out, its fur changed, even its teeth changed, and its diet is almost exclusively seals. So it is very much more carnivorous than most brown bears.
Are they the ones that are the most threat to human beings, the polar bear, out of all the bears?
Technically, perhaps, yes. But my experience with polar bears and many of the Inuit people who I've talked to who encountered polar bears believe that the species is actually more curious than the bears. And I found that the grizzly bears of the north, they refer to them as barren ground grizzlies, are much more aggressive than the polar bears. In fact, they've repeatedly seen one grizzly chasing off a half dozen polar bears on whale carcasses, just because this grizzly has evolved in an area of less food, and it has to range far and wide to find food. So it's become very aggressive. I think I'd rather run into a polar bear than a grizzly.
We've got just a couple of minutes. I want to hit one of the talking points on your bio. It says, I'll just read it. What experiencing nature and the wilderness can teach us about ourselves?
For me personally, I think that wilderness has allowed me the opportunity to contemplate who I am and where I came from and how lucky I am to have the privileges that I have, to have my health. Certainly as a younger man, much of my wilderness travel involved challenging peaks or rivers to run or hundreds of miles of terrain to cross. And in those times, you have the opportunity to contemplate who you are and what is important to you. And of course, that's different for everyone, and it's a very personal experience. But when we go to wilderness, it gives us the opportunity to connect with the wilds in a way that we can't, that very different way from connecting on the phone or with our computers. And it's something that you have to experience to understand that part of that connection is about developing intuition and not only using all of your senses, but using the sixth sense that allows you to tune into things that you normally wouldn't hear or see or feel.
Well, I think on that, we're going to have to wind this down. My guest is Jon Waterman. The book is called Atlas of Wild America. It's a National Geographic book. Is the book out now?
The book was released just a few days ago and is available in most major bookstores and on online sites such as Amazon.
Okay. Last question. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Sure. Thanks for asking. It's jonathanwaterman.com.
Okay. And there's information about the book on the website?
There's information about my last book, which is also an atlas, and there will shortly be information about this one as well.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you and talking to you. Best of luck with the book. Hope it does well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.